Hello, everybody. Welcome to Graduate Student Spotlight. I'm Siddharth Arora, your host, and I'm so happy to welcome today Salman Rafique. Salman Rafique is a doctoral candidate in screen studies at Oklahoma State University, Stillwater. He is currently working on his dissertation, which investigates contemporary international cinema's engagement with the social pathologies of late capitalism. He was the 2023-24 Medical Humanities Fellow of the Center for the Humanities Fellowship Program at OSU, and it's pretty awesome. His broader research interests include gesture, performance studies, global art cinema, medical humanities, Beckett studies, and minor literatures. While his bio tells us how amazing and brilliant Salman is, I just want to mention that Salman is truly one of the most exceptional, generous, kind people I've ever met. And it's a pleasure to welcome Salman to this show. How does it feel to be here, Salman?
Thank you. I feel great talking to a friend with headphones on. Life
Is
can't get better.
it is different format, but we have been having these conversations for a while.
Yeah, we have been having these conversations without ever recording them.
This time we get to record it.
Yeah.
And I also get paid for it, which is very important as a graduate student.
Yeah. Happy to contribute to your financial.
I want to begin by asking you what led you to film scholarship and why do you pursue this? Why did you start pursuing this route of becoming a film scholar?
There's no easy answer to this question and no straightforward answer either. I was primarily trained in literature, and now that I look back on my career, it seems as if transitioning from literature into film or cinema studies was just a natural thing. Anybody who reads literature probably spends a fair bit of time watching screens as well. It was a fairly natural transition for me to switch from primarily teaching theater and drama into cinema and television.
Oh, yeah, that connection is very interesting. And what led you to pursuing this route of studying English and becoming a researcher, a teacher, and pursuing this life of knowledge and learning?
I wanted to be a teacher ever since. Like I never really wanted to be something else. I had always wanted to be a teacher. And probably that had to do with the fact that it seemed like a fun job to me. You could read, you could go to the classrooms, you could teach, you would meet new people every year. It seemed like a lot of fun to me. I think it still is. I still enjoy the same things, reading new things, meeting new people every year, going to the classrooms, teaching, coming back, starting all over again the next semester. I find that fascinating and very satisfying. It wasn't really an accident. I ended up in teaching and in English because I wanted to.
That is such a beautiful answer. And we always need more teachers in the world. Teachers have the most hard job of mostly training students who a lot of times don't want to study the subject that you're teaching them and making them be passionate about it. So for me, it's very gratifying to know that people really want to teach and learn and impart that knowledge. It's a beautiful process and interesting to know that your journey started with teaching. So, who would you say were your early influences as in terms of like your did you have any teaching role models, research role models, or some people who you gravitated towards as a young 20-year-old Salman?
That was years ago.
Ancient history.
The turning point was when I went to the University of the Punjab for my MPhil. There were a couple of professors who I met there. The legendary Professor Shaista Sonu Sirajuddin, who was my thesis supervisor, and Professor Naseem Riaz. But whenever I look back and I think about what has kept me going all these years, it's probably these two people who had a massive influence on my early life as a student of English literature and as somebody who was just starting his career in teaching. A lot of the values that I try and like my teaching is informed by the values that I learned during those 4 to 5 years in classrooms and in the Department of English at the University of the Punjab. They've been the formative influences on me. When I came to the US, I think one of the things that really helped me, and I was very lucky because my first year was disrupted by COVID.
Same here.
Yeah.
But you came a year before
I
me.
came a year before you, and I at least had 1.5 normal semesters. I was very lucky that my comp pedagogy class was with Dr. Lynn Lewis, which really transformed me as a teacher. Like she taught me the values of really preparing well for a class. My very first teaching assistant assignment was with Dr. Greg Hewlin, my advisor. He is arguably the best teacher that I have known in my life. I was with him in a classroom of 100 students where he was teaching maybe 70 of them in person, 20 of them online, and 10 for whom he was recording. He was trying to really speak to every single one of these 100 people. And it was a great learning experience for me. These 4 people that I can name, whose personalities, whose teaching methods, the way they did things, that kind of like has always inspired me in becoming whoever I am.
That is one of the most beautiful answers. Do you think teachers are usually less appreciated in academia? Because to me, even as a graduate student, the goal is always to become a scholar. Teaching is a very important part of it, but we are known by the scholarship that we produce. Without a research paper publication, we probably won't get a job. And it seems that even when I was preparing for the interview, so many questions that I was interested in, like your interest in films and exhaustion, I was focusing so much on research, but to me, it is so interesting and somewhat humbling to an extent, know that we must and we should appreciate our professors and teachers and talk about them more. Do you think that happens less in academia these days than it should?
It's hard for me to say something about it. The problem is, I didn't come from a family where education was, both of my parents didn't complete their high school. I was their eldest child. When I went to school, college, and university, the first people who really inspired me were teachers. My fate was sealed very early on when I met these amazing people, and I was like, okay, here is what I want to do. You know how it is in South Asia, the pressure to go into central superior services or district administration or to do degrees in medicine or engineering is always there. But then you meet these people and they leave such a deep imprint on your life that you learn a lesson about what you want to do for the rest of your life. And for me, one of the things that has always motivated me to keep going is this thing about teaching, where you end up with new people every single year. Every single year, you have this passion to go back to your classes and speak to people who are younger than you, who will be on a very similar journey.
Yeah.
I agree that teachers, it's not a profession that very often gets its due share, though that's the way things are. I really don't care much about it. If it's a passion, it's a passion.
True. So why OSU? How did you come to OSU?
There is no straightforward answer to this question. I was enrolled in a PhD program at International Islamic University in Pakistan. My dissertation was primarily on durational narratives. I wanted to write a dissertation which discussed slow cinema and in particular the idea of these long, slow films and what such narrative strategies did to, like, how is it that slowness was, like, how slowness could be understood in political terms. And it's funny that my dissertation advisor not only quit university, but actually joined a university in Canada. And as he was leaving, he was like, maybe you should try to go to North America and study there. It would be difficult to find somebody who would be interested in a topic like this. I was like, okay, let me look for a place where I can go. And OSU was initially more like a place where I was just applying to try things out. I chanced upon Greg's dissertation. And I was like, here is somebody who wrote their dissertation on a similar topic, and he happens to be a professor at this university, so why not apply there? I did apply. There were things that happened. There was like, okay, maybe I won't get admission or something, and then I did get in, and I came in. It started out as just one of the many things that I was thinking about, but then I ended up here. I liked it a lot. Although I had other opportunities, I could never think about another place.
Yeah, it's truly one of those places where it sticks to you.
Yep.
Yeah, it leaves its imprint in some ways.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also, there is one other thing. One of the professors that I mentioned earlier, Naseem Riaz Bhatt, did his PhD from the same department
Yeah, you've told me that.
a long time ago.
Yeah.
And that was something that did play its part in me applying to OSU. Because most people, when they come from South Asia, you would find them either on the East Coast or on the West Coast. And it's not very common, at least for the students in English or the humanities, to choose universities in the Midwest. So I did think a little bit about it, and I made a choice. And once I had made the choice, it became a permanent decision for me.
Midwest has its charm, truly does. And that is a lot of diners and greasy food.
Yeah. And also, what I admire is these vast, expansive fields. I come from a place which was very overcrowded. Lahore is, I don't know, what can I compare it? You would understand coming from Delhi what Lahore would be like. When I came to Stillwater and I knew that I could drive for hours without meeting a lot of people, I was like, oh, this is the best. You can simply drive and you have cattle and farms and everything that you didn't have in Pakistan. I was like, this is where I want to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have some questions related to your research that I have been very interested in and have had the pleasure of learning about it through our numerous conversations. Since you're such a passionate teacher and researcher, one of the things that always came to me when learning from you and having these discussions with you was like so much empathy that you have. And I think it reflects in the choice of your research, which is exhaustion. So why did you choose exhaustion primarily to research for a dissertation? It is a way in which you seem to take care of other people in some ways, something in them, something valuable in those exhausted bodies. But I want to hear more about why the exhaustion.
You've answered the question in the sense that it's a thing that we very often do not talk about. Grad life, the way it is, when you're taking 2 courses every semester, you're teaching a couple of courses, you are doing a host of other things. There is almost an unsaid refrain. You don't talk. You hardly ever say that I feel exhausted. You might say that to me, but that's not what we say publicly.
Not institutionally.
The productivity imperative kind of lies on us like a burden. Once we went into lockdowns in the first year and COVID was there was fear and nervousness. I started thinking about how it is that we hardly ever talk about this particular issue. It is only natural that slow cinema has always been invested in issues close to exhausted bodies that want to move but cannot move, or bodies that just, we see like these fairly long films where people are just walking and walking, and there is very little that happens. And with my interest in it was almost a natural destination for me that I would end up at exhaustion and think about it. But then, as I said, something of our own experience of having these tired, fatigued bodies did play its part in me thinking about, okay, this is something that I need maybe research a little bit more and think a little bit more about and maybe end up writing a little bit about.
So, do you think exhaustion, as you study in film, is it primarily the aesthetic of slowness and like the elongated temporalities? Is it a very important aesthetic medium, or are there other forms of aestheticism that reflect on?
It would primarily because I'm one of the lucky ones. Not everybody enjoys durational cinema. I do enjoy it. I do sit down and watch it. The experience of watching a film in itself, I would give you an example. So back in 2021, I had nothing else to do. I was just sitting and doing nothing in front of my television, and I was watching films day in, day out. That was one way of blocking the nervous energy that was coming in with this experience of COVID in a different country. And also, if you remember, at one point it did become about, okay, we didn't know whether we could stay in the US any longer or not, and we didn't know
Absolutely.
where we
Yeah.
would touch down if we have to leave the US,
Yeah.
because our home countries were basically not taking in people, even their own citizens. So it was in those days that I started thinking about it. Much of my interest is not really like it is as much aesthetic as also like about the very reality of our own lives. When I think about cinema, I think about films and filmmakers who are speaking to us not in terms of it's not as if we are Beckettian characters.
Are we
It's,
not?
we are, but at the same time, it's the day-to-day life that we are living, and it is that kind of life that brings fatigue and exhaustion with it.
Yeah.
And that very personal experience made me think about, okay, we are expected to do a lot, but how is it that doing all of this work, and not just me, but a lot of other people, it's in experiences which they hardly ever talk about, which hardly ever enter into institutional discourses, which people, even when they talk about them, look at them as a problem that needs solving. So if you
Yeah.
tell somebody that I am drained or depleted, and people would actually give you tips about, oh, this is the way you can revive your body. My problem is more fundamental about why and how did we reach here? How is it that uh, we have ended up with all our resources, with all the technological advancement, we have reached a point where every single one of them is doing more and more work than probably a lot of other people, than probably we had expected to do.
That is such a fascinating answer. And I think that touches on so many things that I'm interested in. So I'll stick to slowness or like temporality before we move on, because I wanted to seek your opinion on this. How do you think that kind of durational cinema works specifically in our digital time? The speed with which time works in reels, short things that keep coming at us, and how is that different? That also creates a kind of exhaustion. And
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of times I suffer from that kind of exhaustion. So, how do you think that kind of slowness is trying to break it, or what happens there?
I mean, it's a strange paradox. I watch reels.
Yeah.
Generally, that's how I end my day. And I mean,
Everybody, Salman also watches reels.
sometimes it goes on for, I do not even know. I'm flipping them up. The next time I look at the time, and I've been doing it for 3 hours, my eyes are tired. I probably have a headache. My shoulders are hurting. And I realize that I've been doing this for so long. And I think it's not just the slowness, but also like overstimulation. I think social media is, most of the new media is because it captures our attention in such an addictive way that ultimately we end up, it's vampiric. That's what I would call it.
It's a good
Because
word.
we are drawn to it, and yet by the time we are done with it, we are totally exhausted. We feel, I fall asleep. That is my way of telling myself that this is the last thing that I need to do. Right after I go back from
Yeah.
whatever I'm doing, I'm in bed and I'm watching reels. I don't know how long, but at some point I just fall asleep. And I think that is out of sheer fatigue.
Yeah, I think that's an experience of a lot of people in our times. So, how do you think, since you mentioned technology and how fatigued we are as a society in general, how do you think we think about exhaustion today? And how do you think it is different from, let's say, 16th century? Do you see in your readings, in your findings, historically, a change in which work was approached? Because I imagine our introduction into modernity has completely changed every single living moment into work or some kind of performance within the capitalist economy. And it appears that there is some kind of difference. Do you think that there are certain things that are different, or how does it work out?
It's a question that a lot of people have tried to answer. I'm not a historian, but I would like to believe that the experience of exhaustion, people have always felt exhausted. Anna Katerina Schaffner has a wonderful book called Exhaustion, a History, which gives you all the stages. It goes way back into biblical times and even before that. And it talks about, okay, it's not as if we are the first exhausted generation, necessarily out of the amount of work they did.
Yeah.
It's the experience of a 16th century peasant would be very different from me. But I very often think that ours is specific in the sense that industrial modernity promised plenty. It gave us this illusion that one day machines would do everything for us. And you and I would just sit somewhere, have virtual reality equipment stuck to our eyes, and we would just have fun and nothing else. But we realized over the past 3 to 4 decades, what we have realized is that although industrial modernity did deliver on its promises, a lot of people do not work as much as you and I do. And a lot of people do not experience as much anxiety as you and I do. The huge majority of people have actually ended up doing a lot more work than we thought we would be doing.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. Our kitchens have way more equipment than people used to have, let's say 30 or 40 years ago.
Absolutely, yes.
Back in India, people would do a lot of things with their hands. When I came to the US, I would always knead flour with hands. And now you have machines for them. Machines make your life easy. They reduce your work. But at the same time, we realize that isn't happening. A lot of my focus has been on the kind of immaterial labor, the kind of emotional labor that contemporary economic organization expects of us. One would think that doing emotional labor, as you asked earlier about teaching, if teaching is a passion, it wouldn't tire you. It does.
Oh, yeah.
You and I both play cricket, and nobody talked about cricketers feeling exhausted about 30, 40 years ago. Marcus Trescothick started it.
Yeah.
And it isn't as if people were not exhausted before, but it is just that we have the language for it. We have a way of analyzing people's behavior now, and we have started paying attention to it. That is what I'm trying to do about contemporary life in terms of how it is that not necessarily our bodies, but also how we are emotionally engaged in work that seems natural to all of us,
Yeah.
but actually depletes our energies way faster than purely physical labor would.
So that's very fascinating. You mention how kitchen equipment and machines can make our life easier. And
Yeah.
it's so strange that it does make our life in some way easy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we are working more. Do you think the kind of work, as you're saying, emotional labor has changed and we are exhausted? And in the process of being constantly exhausted, with or without the machines?
The example of the machine was, I use that to refer back to what the industrial modernity promised us. We should be working less. Women should be working less. However, not everybody has access to the same machines. Not everybody has access to everything. Even when the machine goes, this Haldiram ad keeps showing up on my television. And where a mother is sending her son to the US, they are rich people, yet she is worried about the food he will cook in the US. And she's packing all the Haldiram bags for him in the bag. And it is this kind of emotional labor that hasn't gone away. It has been industrialized. We are expected to do increasingly have a cognitive or a psychological dimension. We are like in knowledge economies where a lot of the labor we do is not necessarily physical labor. Not that it has become easier, because once again, I want to like keep it in mind that a lot of it's if when I'm not doing that job, somebody else is. If I'm not
Yeah.
cleaning this room at the end of the day, somebody else is. It's just that has become invisibilized. But you
Yeah,
and I,
completely.
even when living this rather somewhat calling grad life as a privilege is in itself a bit of a paradox, but
There is certain class of people who can even pursue graduate
yeah,
school.
exactly.
Yeah.
But even with that, it's this consistent experience of number one, precarity, and number two, this consistent experience of never being done with a job, never accomplishing something, never feeling as if we have done what we were supposed to do. I think about it in this way. In 20 years from now, how many people will be able to retire
Oh, that's a
knowing
good
that the
question.
rest of their lives will be work free? Nobody. The way the welfare state is like crumbling down and the way state is shrinking, in a couple of more decades, everyone would be working from maybe 13 years of age to whenever they die.
Whenever they die. Yeah.
And that means that we need to think about what all this proliferation of work is doing. And at the same time, the employment opportunities are shrinking for both of us.
Yes.
When I
Truly.
started my career, it wasn't particularly difficult to end up in teaching in higher education.
Yeah.
Now that I look back on it, how many of us have a realistic chance of landing decent employment, sustainable employment
Yeah.
for maybe 20 years? Very
It's
few. When I think about it, it's not just something theoretical, it's more about the lived experience, the everyday experience of you and me, of people who do their work, but their work is very often invisibilized. People who do their work and we think that this is just what we use animals. We think they were created for labor. One of my biggest problems has been whether I should be able to pick and choose how much labor I want to do. But that's increasingly becoming difficult for people. And I think that's something that needs our attention.
It seems to me, as you're saying, that
I
every
mean,
breath is a form of working, and it's like we're just working with breathing.
yeah, I think, for instance, this is part of the job. These are the conversations we have on our walks, and those are fun.
Yeah. Are you saying this is not fun?
As much as it is fun, it's killing me because I'm not somebody who likes to sit before a camera and talk. I know that this is going to be somewhere and stay there forever. Oh, Siddharth, you have to know this is work. You are getting paid for it. I am probably doing what a good graduate student should do. Yeah.
You're not a good graduate student. You're a fantastic graduate
Thank
student.
you.
And
I mean,
that's why you're here.
yeah.
This had to have a moment where we crib about the fact that we have to do it. That's how Salman and I have conversations. So I'm very happy that we have that moment here. I do want to reflect on one of the things that you mention, and the word you focus on is a lot of times you say people.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, since you've mentioned invisibilized labor,
Yeah.
do you think there is a certain racial, gendered, national aspect to the kind of experience that people have towards exhaustion? Do you think some bodies are more exhausted than other bodies?
That would mean that as if we can quantify it. And I really don't know if we can or cannot.
Okay.
I mean, but
That's a Marxist reply.
why is it that our roads are cleaned when we are not there?
Mm.
Generally at night.
Okay, yeah.
I never see people
Yeah.
doing it. Or when we are at work and somebody would go to our homes and pick up our trash or something like that. I know from experience that The fourth floor is cleaned generally at night.
Yeah. Fourth floor is Moral Hall.
Yeah, that's where our offices are. Also, the kind of labor that happens away from the work we never get to see. It's not as if people are not working. People are doing things, but the, the way things we see them, it almost seems as if it is all natural. There is some automated process that just does thing and things just show up to us. That is how think about the life of commodities. When you buy a new shirt, it just didn't show up there. It just didn't like one day just ended up on a shelf.
Yeah.
Think about all the people who worked tirelessly to do all of this.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to understand, because it seems that, as we have talked about, there are some bodies working in a sweatshop in Bangladesh to produce that shirt.
Exactly.
And that's why we can afford cheap shirts at Walmart. Do you think the framework of the global south, or the frameworks that are more geographically oriented, do they have any particular traction in them in terms of the kind of labor that they have to perform, and the exhaustion they feel? Because other parts of the world are not as mechanized, it seems, as the United States might be. How does the exhaustion play out in global cinema, since you study global cinema?
That's a great question. We have to remain aware of these differences. It's funny that one of the chapters in my dissertation is about room service, the chambermaids.
Yeah.
In generally very expensive 4 or 5-star hotels. And I've stayed in a few. You hardly ever encounter them. Their job is to come to your rooms when you aren't there. You come back to your room and it's like brand new.
It's impeccable.
It's impeccable.
Yeah.
And somebody does it. But how do they do it and when do they do it? The way it is done invisibilizes the labor of a lot of people. And who are these people who often do this job? Very often women from minority groups. The films that I'm working on all have women as their central characters, people who are performing these roles. They focus on their lives and the temporalities of this kind of job. For instance, you may not be able to go back home at a particular time. There is one Indian film which is called The Labor of Love. It's a Bengali film. And it has a couple, like apparently a married couple. The film doesn't have any dialogues or anything. It's not a silent film as such, but the two central protagonists never say thing to each other.
Oh, wow.
The man is apparently, he works in a newspaper printing press, and the woman works as a quality control manager in a factory which makes bags, leather bags or something. And their jobs are such that they never actually meet. He works at night and she goes to work in the day.
Oh, that's sad.
That's it. The more you think about the kind of work that people do, the more you realize that a lot of work is never really seen. It remains invisible. A lot of work expected of us makes us reinvent ourselves as human beings. For instance, in my research area, to go back to the flight attendants and their experience, people very often are doing, and once again, that is what we used to call the feminization of labor that, although was not entirely feminine, it is sometimes done by men as well, but the characteristics that it has, the kind of precarity that it experiences, the kind of invisibilization, self-training, and the kind of emotional labor that it requires is very often expected of women. So thinking about marginalities within people's experience of exhaustion is something that we should always be aware of. Certain bodies do a lot more labor than other bodies, and their experience of exhaustion very often remains invisible. Francois Verger has a wonderful essay on these economies of exhaustion, where she talks about these gyms or offices where we go to work and we very often don't think about who made all of these places workable in the first place. When we show up at these places at 7 a.m., they are absolutely fine for us. And we hardly ever notice who
It's
did
like
it.
a movie set.
Yeah.
It's all the extras have done everything, or like the people who are supposed to do, and we are actors and we come and perform on a stage.
Cinema gives us a very good, like when you talk about below the line labor, people whose labor never really shows up in a film, and they often do more work than anybody else. Not that people whose labor shows, but a lot of times these people whose labor makes a film, like in the end product, they just have final acknowledgement as just a little name on the screen, and that's it. It doesn't account for all the work that has gone into it. These are the things that very often within the way the economies have been set up, the experiences of marginality are also the experiences of exclusion.
Yeah.
The fruits of labor are very different for different people.
I've been reading Edward Glissant and I'm reading Poetics of Relation. His work is a lot on relation, but also opacity. It seems that the manner in which late capitalism creates not just a surveillance state, but also a kind of transparency. Like we seek transparency, and the transparency elides discussions about the obscure, the invisibilized labor, as you're mentioning, and those bodies are out of the frame, and it's hard to incorporate them. If not incorporate, then at least have it accounted for.
Yeah.
And thank you for such a fantastic conversation and replies. I do want to ask you two more things before you go. I want to ask if you have to recommend 3 films to somebody, any 3 films that you're interested in to study about exhaustion in films, what those top 3 recommendations would be.
This is,
and I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah. This is a question that I always find it difficult to answer because it's not as if you're thinking about films all the time. I would probably, if anybody ever wanted to know how exhaustion could be studied, I would always ask them to go back and think maybe about watch any Beckett film, his films. But those are like allegories of exhaustion. Even in more mainstream cinema, it's increasingly becoming easier to see how exhaustion functions. One of the films, I just taught contemporary international cinema, and one of the films that I showed to my students was Thomas Stuber's German film In the Isles, which is a wonderful exploration of the kind of work that stockers at big box stores do. So somebody at Walmart who would stock the shelves at night when others are gone. It is that loneliness of the experience when everybody else has gone and you are just there stocking shelves, doing the hard labor and then coming back home. Because of the temporality of your work, you cannot expect to have a relationship because you work the nights. And that defines the rest of your existence. It's a wonderful film. Another very big favorite with me is Magnus von Horn's Sweat, which is about a fitness influencer who experiences exhaustion steadily in the film. It breaks her down. It brings her to a point where she says that she's happy to be weak and pathetic because that allows her to be exhausted. As a fitness influencer, she gets told that she can't talk about her own experiences of inadequacy or not feeling well because her job is to create this aura of wellness. It's a beautiful film in the way it presents this experience of exhaustion. Another wonderful film now that like
on a roll.
Yeah, kind of on a roll. Which I mean, there are hundreds of books out there on it and hundreds of films, but there are some that just stand out. One of the great films that stands out is Kelly Reichardt's Wendy and Lucy. It's a wonderful film. Almost all the work of Sean Baker, particularly Take Out, which is an incredibly beautiful film. It doesn't get talked about as much as the rest of his work. A lot of his films are about people a lot of these people are minorities. Tangerine is about 2 Black trans women who are also sex workers. Towards the end of the film, the experience of exhaustion. It's a beautiful film to study how 2 characters just end up exhausted, sitting together, and that's it. Take Out is another great film. The illegal Chinese immigrants in New York City. It's just a story of one day and how work wears them down by the end of work. And whatever else is happening in their life weighs them down by the end of the day. Another one of my favorite films is, and because we were talking about flight attendants, it was Zero Fucks Given, a recent French film uh, about a flight attendant and what she has to do. I don't know, I can go on and on.
Everybody, this guy was not ready to tell us what 3 films and how many we have.
That's your fault. You make me think. And then I feel, okay, I should give a better example. No, that wasn't good enough. I should maybe give an even better example. And then you end up in this spiral where you're just naming one after another. No.
That's perfectly my fault. I take the blame. Well, just last question before you go. What's next for Salman, the student, film scholar, teacher, and most importantly, the person?
You have to ask this.
That was as exhausted and
You've left me in an existential crisis. You've triggered something. One of the immediate goals is to graduate as soon as possible, which it's the most obvious goal. Also, another thing that I need to do is and that's something that you will also be able to empathize with. I have to go on job market pretty soon, which is a scary experience from all that I have heard my colleagues, people who went on job market before me do.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what I am thinking about immediately. Probably a fair bit of writing that I need to do. I'm just trying to reassure my advisor. I know I should write.
Yeah. Dr. Yulin, he's writing.
He's right. Yeah, I need as many people to vouch for me as possible. I don't have much in writing to prove that I am, but yeah, that's pretty much it. I have a bunch of conferences lined up later this year, and that's about professional life. There is hardly anything else left in life. That's how we define ourselves. And that's the problem of contemporary living, that it's hard to think about anything else.
Okay. Thank you so much for such an insightful, thought-provoking, detailed, and truly fantastic conversation. It has been a real pleasure of my OSU journey to get to know you, to have the opportunity to learn from you. I remember the first day you picked me up and you helped me out on the first day. I was extremely grateful. It's been one of the best parts of this journey, and I'm extremely grateful to you for everything and for this conversation. And thank you for coming here and being on the show. Bye, everybody. We'll be back with more graduate student spotlight episodes. We have 3 more to go this year. See you all soon.